A 9-year-old girl from California sees an abortion image, which catapults her to starting the largest online following in the pro life movement. I'm Mark Harrington, and you've tuned in to Activist Radio, The Mark Harrington Show. The Mark Harrington Show is brought to you by Created Equal. You can find out more about us by going to createdequal.org. On today's program, we're going to be discussing the pro life journey of Lila Rose and her new book, Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. As a 15-year-old girl, Lila started live action in her family's living room out of a deep passion to defend the rights of the most vulnerable among us and to expose the abortion industry. And then at 16, she built the largest online following in the pro-life movement and addressed members of the European Parliament and the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and has been named as one of National Journal's 25 most influential women under 35. I met Lila for the first time in 2009 at the University of California, Berkeley, when we were doing the Genocide Awareness Project. I just finished her new book, which we're going to be talking about today, which is Fighting for Life, entitled Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. Lila, thanks for being on the program today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's great to be on.
So, Lila, I wanted to bring you on because of the book. I know you've been working on this for years. And I just want to tell you, I finished it last night. I started it on an airplane on the way to Florida before we did our justice ride. And then I finished it last night. And I want to tell people, I mean, if you have a young person, or it doesn't even have to be a young person, this will inspire them to get into the battle for life. I mean, I read this, and I'm going to require it for all of our staff and all of our interns and all of our young people. This will be required reading. But a lot of what I want to do, I mean, this is about your story, you know, the story of how you started live action, but it's also about motivating people to stand for justice. That is, and so what I kind of want to do is just kind of go back and talk about your story, your pro life journey, if you will. Right from the start in chapter 1, you talk about when you were 9 years old and you were having nightmares, which, by the way, I've had those too, similar ones, like, you know, relating to abortion and other things. But you were talking about these nightmares that you had about crying babies and things like that. But you also saw an abortion image that was put in the book by it was Jack Wilkie, you know, the late Jack Wilkie, that he wrote the handbook on abortion. If you would take us back, I mean, 9 years old, this is pretty amazing. That's when you first became aware of what was going on.
Sure. The nightmares came later on, in my teen years and then
Okay.
continued through. And I think, there's a lot to say on that. But
Hmm.
the kind of spark for me was at 9 years old, discovering what abortion was. And before this
Hmm.
time, I had been, I'm one of 8 kids. My
Hmm.
grandmother would volunteer at the pregnancy center. So I had this awareness of life being beautiful and good and the importance of helping mothers and children. And so one afternoon when I was around 9, I was looking for a book to read in my parents' home. And I found this book, as you mentioned, A Handbook on Abortion by Dr. and Mrs. Wilkie. And I
Hmm.
was curious, I'd again heard of abortion sort of, in some sort of abstract, but I'd never really understood deeply what it was. And so I opened this book, and in the middle, Mark, there's these images. There's an insider
Right.
insert with images. And I was just cut to the heart looking
Hmm.
at these images because what I saw for the first time was a child in the first trimester,
Yeah.
10 weeks old. I saw arms, legs. I could see this newly developing little body that had been the victim of a first trimester suction abortion. And I think anyone, and I know this is so key to your work, anyone, when they
Hmm.
see the victim, when they see that abortion is no longer in the abstract, but it's about a human life, a child who's been violently destroyed, it is heartbreaking. And I, of course, wanted to learn more after that. Being 9 years old, very precocious, I love to read. I began to study the issue. And I discovered
Mhm,
that at the time there were 3,000 abortions daily. I
mhm,
discovered that, this had been legal since before I was born, when seven Supreme Court justices on the highest court in the land made it the law of the land in Roe v. Wade in their Supreme Court 1973 decision. And all of these things inspired me to try to get involved. And again, being young, being very sensitive, being very precocious, I was very interested in a
mhm.
lot of different causes.
Yeah.
I wanted my life to mean something, and be useful to others. And so I did get involved in other causes, but I kept coming back in my teen years to the crisis of abortion, because I came across the writings of Mother Teresa, who became a hero to me, this little nun from Calcutta who did all this beautiful work with the lepers and the dying. And Mother
Mhm,
Teresa called abortion the greatest destroyer of peace. She
mhm,
didn't call poverty that. She didn't call homelessness that. She didn't call war that. She called abortion the greatest destroyer of peace. And she said, in a nation where a mother can kill her own child, what is left but for you and for I to kill one another? And I just thought, this is the cause of our day. The death
mhm.
toll, the
No
fact that
doubt.
it's legalized and supported. I have to get in the fight. And so that inspired me to take the next step and start live action.
My guest is Lila Rose. She's the president of Live Action. You can find out more by going to liveaction.org. And folks, I want you to pick up this book. And in order to do that, you can just go to our store at Created Equal. We have it there. You can buy it online if you like, or you can go to Amazon, obviously, and you can go to Live Action. Live Action right now has an offer for a pre-order. That means that the book isn't actually available until May 4th, but you can get on the list to pre-order. In other words, your credit card won't be charged until the book is actually sent out to you, but you can get on the pre-order list for the book. And again, the book is called Fighting for Life: Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. Uh, Lila, obviously we're kindred spirits on the use of
Mhm,
abortion victim photography, and Jack Wilkie was the pioneer.
mhm,
After him, you've got Joe Scheidler and Greg Cunningham, and of course myself and others that have used these historically in the public square. It's interesting. So many pro-lifers were brought into the movement after seeing an abortion image. It's very common to hear that as testimony, and it's also interesting that you were motivated by that as well. I found it interesting in the book at 13 years old. I mean, you were only 13 years old, and you found out that there was an abortion center nearby, and you asked your parents if you could go at 13 years old, and they let you go. Were you unsupervised? But you went to this local abortion center. You didn't really
mhm,
realize that there was something in your neighborhood like that. What was that experience like at 13?
mhm. So I might have been, I think it was 14, but it was
Was it
very
14?
young.
I got that one
And
wrong. Okay.
no, you're close. And
Okay.
my parents were, pro-life. I mean, they had 8 kids. They,
Mhm.
were involved with the pregnancy center to some degree. They were supporters of it. And so, when I expressed interest to do this, we'd never done that before as a family. My parents had never been. They understood. I mean, they knew that this was something I was becoming very passionate about, and so they wanted to make sure that I'd done my homework, that I knew other people going, that I understood,
Right.
what was the safe way to do that and the way that would be best. And there's public sidewalk; it's free to do this, and I would just be praying outside there. The pregnancy center had a program they were connected with, and other people connected through different pro-life activists who went there regularly. So I got in touch with them in advance. And long story short, I got permission. A friend of mine had his license, and another friend of mine could come along, and so we just took off and headed over there. And we had some pamphlets with us with pregnancy center information and information about abortion risk and fetal development in case we had the opportunity to hand it to a woman going in for an abortion. But getting there, I remember just being so struck, because here I was, 14 with some friends standing on the sidewalk, and we're watching all these cars drive into this big parking lot. There's a big Planned Parenthood
Mhm.
building in downtown San Jose, about 10 miles from where I grew up. And there's all these women going in. I remember just being struck that none of them looked happy. Some were crying, some were very young, some were just sent in by themselves with like a boyfriend, or some man would wait in the car. And I remember just, these escorts would come out, Planned Parenthood escorts, who would basically shout over the voice of another gentleman there named Gary, who was pro-life, trying to offer resources to try to silence his offer of resources. And I remember just thinking, within feet of me, several
Mhm.
yards behind these brick walls, there is an abortionist dismembering
Mhm.
human beings,
Wow.
um, up to 6 months old. That clinic killed children up to 24 weeks old,
Mm.
6 months old enough to survive outside the womb, human children. And there's nobody I can call. It's not like I can call the police and say, "Help, there's a
Right.
murder," in this building. Like, this was legalized and this was protected by the law. And I just thought, how can we go on like this? And I remember across the street, there was a children's daycare and a YMCA, and it was by a residential area. And
Mhm.
life was just happening. Families were
Right.
having their families, children were being dropped
Mhm.
off. And here we were in that same community, dismembering, tearing to death human children. And I was just, I thought, I was like, I can't ever look back. I can't not do more after this, because
Right.
this is the crisis of our day that is being widely ignored by society.
Well, it's interesting too. You talk about going to the In-N-Out Burger next door or what have you. And every time I go to California, I go to the In-N-Out Burger for sure. But and you were sitting there with your friends, and they were like talking about what kind of meal they're going to get, and you're
Yeah.
like, "Do you know what just happened? I mean, you know what's happening across the street." I mean, it does disrupt normal life. I mean,
Yeah.
in a way. I mean,
It's
it
not
does.
normal. Yeah, and I think
No, it's
we're
not normal.
we're used to living in society in peace together. I mean, human beings are kind of wired to want to live peacefully together. We create societies that are, so in that sense, peer pressure is good. But when you become so numb and so
Right.
accepting of this incredible bloodthirst,
Mhm.
bloodletting that's happening,
Mhm.
literally our children thrown away as medical waste, and every life is just going on. It requires action, and it requires standing up when it's difficult and controversial. And so the book Fighting for Life, I share the story
Mhm.
of how I learned to do that one step at a time, and I made mistakes and I had to keep going, because I think that's ultimately the message. So many young people, so many people in general, they sense that there's a crisis. They've begun to learn about it, but they just feel this like pressure to stay silent. And they feel that there's so much at risk if they were to speak. And so that's the goal of the book, is through lessons and inspiration and encouragement to say, actually, we need your voice. You have a voice. You can do this, and encourage people to stand up and speak out.
And folks, I want you to take action today, and that is go to Live Action's website at liveaction.org and pre-order this book. Pre-order the book, Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. This is Lila LaRose's story, but it's more than that. It's really an inspirational story on how you can overcome obstacles in your life to get in the fight for life. So we exhort you to go get her book. You can get a pre-order. You don't get the book yet until May 5th. That's when it comes out to the general public. Lila, what I'd like to do is talk about one more thing, and that
Mm.
is your time at UCLA. Early on in your pro-life work at Live Action, you were doing undercover investigations. I didn't know this, but that's when you met James O'Keefe, which I had no idea you
Mhm.
had met him. I didn't know that part of your story. Of course, James
Mhm.
O'Keefe is known for Project Veritas nowadays,
Mhm.
but James O'Keefe was one of the guys that kind of encouraged you to get involved in investigative journalism. And he spoke at UCLA, I think it was, if I recall correctly. And that's when you began to think about these undercover investigations. Live Action early on was known for these things and pioneered them. Talk about that. And then I want to talk about the pivot, because the pivot's
Mhm.
really important.
Of course. So, and we still do investigative reporting,
Right.
but it's not the main focus. It's not like the what defines us as our strategy, but it still
Right.
has incredible value. And
Of course.
as a college student, as my freshman year, I was trying to find a way to spread the pro life message. I wrote for the Daily Bruin. I wanted to start my
Mhm.
own newspaper magazine because there was a pro abortion slant at my school newspaper. The pro life
Of
message was
course.
not getting out on campus, and I wanted to do that.
Right.
And, James O'Keefe was working for the Leadership Institute at the time. He was fresh out
Right.
of college himself. And he, had a grant through the Leadership Institute to help me launch the magazine. And he said, why don't you just investigate your health center yourself? Because I said, it's very pro abortion here. They're not providing pregnancy resources at UCLA. They're not really for choice. And so he said, well, why don't you just go undercover yourself? And so I started to research and study. And long story short, that launched me actually going undercover into my health center and documenting how my own health center on campus was very pro abortion. They offered two different abortionists, two different kinds of abortion, but they did not offer any pregnancy support or referrals or adoption support or referrals. And this was a big story when I released it. And then I started
Yep.
doing investigative reporting of abortion clinics in Los Angeles. And I was really inspired by the work of Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics, who I,
Mhm.
I know you're
Yep.
familiar with. And,
Of course.
he had done pioneering work himself. And so I began to take a lot of the work he'd done and build on that to show, okay, how sexual abuse cover up and other abuses are being committed in abortion clinics local to me. So that was my foray into investigative reporting.
Yeah, and then after that, of course, David Daleiden and his exposure of Planned Parenthood with the body parts,
Mhm.
sales of body parts and all that, still ongoing, his lawsuits and so forth. Again, folks, I want you to go and pick up this book. You can get it on pre-order. It's entitled "Fighting for Life," Lila Rose's book, "Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World." You can get it on pre-order by going to liveaction.org. It comes out to the public on May 4th. Lila, I mean, people know you for the investigative reporting, but there was a pivot, and it was interesting in the book to figure out and find out why you moved towards grassroots education and online education with videos and so forth. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, Planned Parenthood was pretty much the target of a lot of the investigations,
Mhm.
and despite all the great work you were doing, and even with David Daleiden today, Planned Parenthood is still getting $600 million a
Mhm.
year from the federal government.
Mhm.
Did that play into it? And then let's move into what you're doing now with live action with
Yeah.
some of the most, I think, most effective videos around.
Thanks, Mark. So the book, as you mentioned, has a chapter on pivoting. So the book
Hmm.
is a series of lessons for, activists or really
Right.
anybody who wants to make a difference in the world and, wrestling with their own insecurities, their own struggles, finding ways to get started, et cetera. But there's a really key chapter on the importance of pivoting because when we're
Hmm.
getting involved in a cause, the strategies that we're using or the efforts that we're using, they may work for a
Right.
time, but then we might see
Hmm.
how they're insufficient. And so that's
Right.
where we have to take stock of what we're doing, how effective it is, and then perhaps redirect our course. And so there was a
Mhm.
point where I was in DC. I was spent, lobbying. I was going around. We were doing these mass investigations annually. David Daleiden had just done his phenomenal expose of baby body parts being sold. This was 2015, and David had
Mhm.
worked for Live Action previously, and went on to do this. And so we were, promoting that work, and millions of people were seeing all of this content about Planned Parenthood's abuses, and yet they were still receiving
Yeah.
$1.6 million daily. And then, even under the Trump administration, I was just seeing the cowardice amongst pro-life legislators, and even
Mhm.
even those that were very pro-life. I mean, even under the Trump administration, tragically, Planned Parenthood funding went up, even though they cut it through the Protect Life rule by 60 million. Their overall funding federally went up through Medicaid. So it's just it's like this immovable block. And I was thinking and praying and researching about, like, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard that even when we expose to millions of people the evils of Planned Parenthood, they're still getting money? And what I realized is, if we can't persuade people on abortion, they will always find ways to justify funding for Planned Parenthood, because deep down they
True.
think, well, we still need these services. So what we need to do is we need to persuade people directly on what abortion actually is, the violence that it does to a child, because then Planned Parenthood has no standing. But as long as they can claim we're doing some good work, even if you show these other abuses, people are still going to say, well, they're doing enough good work to still justify the money. So we need to directly attack and expose the evil of abortion. And so that's where, we took a shift where, we're still going to expose Planned Parenthood. We're still going to show
Right.
all these other abuses, like sex trafficking cover up and sexual abuse cover up and lying to women and baby parts trafficking. But the biggest thing that Planned Parenthood is doing wrong every day is killing children, is committing abortion,
Right.
900 abortions daily. And that doesn't take an investigation to expose. That's a fact. That's in their own annual
Mhm.
reports.
Right.
So what do people need to know? As you do this daily, Mark, with Created Equal, people need to see who the victim of abortion is. They need to have an emotional, intellectual enlightenment of the
Mhm.
violence that an abortion commits on an innocent, helpless human life that deserves to live, that deserves love. And that just takes straight up education on the humanity of the child. It takes getting creative to find ways to continually expose the abortion procedure, and so that launched Live Action's Pivot. We started to work with former abortionists to actually explain what the abortion procedure was. We started to do animations and other graphical illustrations of what abortion was to show people. We started to tell more stories about, abortion victims who survived, feature, abortion survivors, find ways to humanize the children killed
Right.
by abortion. And we've seen that, and as I know you see it with your work, to be very fruitful because that's
Very
what really
effective.
changes a heart and a mind. And then,
Well,
of course, they're
and then
against Planned Parenthood.
and I think the premier video that you guys created, which was, with the former abortionist Dr. Levatino, I don't know how many views you've gotten at this point, but, if you would, Mr. Producer, you can put that up, the website. Um, that was really the thing that
Mhm,
launched a lot of your online, education, and even today, you guys are still known for that, and that, before we move to and we're gonna get running out of time here real quick, but
mhm.
how do you see after the election, the purge? We're seeing Twitter and Facebook and some of these others starting to censor, if not take down, uh, conservative voices, Christian voices. How are you guys trying to handle that? And then I'd like to finish
Sure.
off with some of the inspirational, motivational stuff in the book.
Yeah. Well, it is true. A lot of the big tech companies are very pro-abortion. Facebook's COO donated millions publicly to Planned Parenthood. We've been totally banned from Pinterest, for example, the popular image sharing website. We've
Right.
had big issues at Facebook, at Twitter, at YouTube over the years. We're still growing our following by thousands, sometimes tens of thousands every week, though. And that's
Mhm.
because we try to play by the rules as much as possible. We try to
Right.
work behind the scenes as much as possible with representatives at these companies. They're not all ideologues. There's
Right.
good, normal people working at these companies who are reasonable. There definitely are ideologues involved who can be very unreasonable, but we try to work with them and we try to make sure we follow their rules. I mean, I will say they've certainly been very biased against pro-life voices, or you could say conservative Christian voices. But I think we have to be careful to not always say, "Oh, we're being persecuted by this tech company,"
Right.
when maybe there was an accident or maybe there was actually an error in how
Yeah,
we
and
proceeded
a
that
lot
did
of a lot
violate
of
a term.
pro-lifers I hear a lot of pro-lifers say, "Oh, we just need to get off these platforms." I say, "No. No, no, we need to stay on these platforms. This is where America and the world actually
Mhm,
this is where a lot of the communications are happening." Lila, in the last few
mhm.
minutes we have, we got about 2 minutes left. But first of all, folks, I want you to get the book. So go to liveaction.org. You can pre-order the book for Lila Rose's journey, if you will, pro-life journey, fighting for life, becoming a force for change in a wounded world. In the last few minutes that we have here, I want to talk about some of the other aspects of the book because you
Mhm,
talk about people getting into the game, how to understand your talents, your wounds, and so you
mhm.
can build a solid foundation, those kinds of things. Finding inner courage, not giving up, and facing obstacles. Now we got about a minute left to explain that, but I give a little
Yeah.
bit of teaser to people as to why they want to go ahead and get the book and read about that part of it.
Sure. Well, I think it can feel overwhelming at times. We look at the problems in the world, the problem of abortion. We're like, okay, what can I do? We think that, we're going to so controversial. People are going to look down on us, that we're going to lose friends, family won't
Right.
talk to us. I mean, there's a lot at stake. And so the book walks through different elements of this and elements that I had to wrestle with myself and provide
Mhm.
different guidelines and tips and secrets that I've discovered for how to navigate this, because there is a path forward. I mean, that's the message of the book.
Mhm.
There is a way to get started. And I provide examples of that. There is a way to persevere even when you feel alone. And I give examples of that. And ultimately, there is the message that, it is scary. Leadership, doing anything for a just cause, when there's people being victimized, there are going
Mhm.
to be challenges, but you will get the grace you need in the day if you just take that next step, if you're not willing to give up, don't sit with the apathy, don't sit with the numbness. Stand up and let your heart break. Let yourself be wounded by the struggles in the world. And that's a big message of the book too, is like open your heart, take a small step. Here's some inspiration for how to do that, and then keep going. Because what I learned, I started as a girl where almost no one would come to my meetings when I was a teenager for live action. And now over 5 million people are following my organization, and millions more, are in the pro-life movement doing amazing work. And so what might seem like a tiny effort at first, that's how difficult, you never know the amazing fruit that it will grow. And so I hope that it encourages and inspires you.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up. Again, my guest today has been Lila Rose with Live Action. Folks, go ahead and pre order this book by going to liveaction.org. If you want to be motivated, or if you have a young person that is thinking about getting involved in the pro life movement or any other cause for justice, this is the book for them. Again, Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. Rose has been my guest today. We'll see you next time. God bless you. God bless America. And remember, America.